Roy Gardner, sometimes termed the last of the Old West bad men, and with a criminal record spanning 30 years, made the mat shop, constructing insulated mats for use on the docks. Once he had broken out of prison aboard a speeding locomotive. He would learn his lesson and mend his ways, but soon after his release from Alcatraz, he would make his final escape via the suicide route. Whitaker and Means of Lindbergh case infamy were assigned to cleanup detail in the yard under the guns of two towers. Albert Bates, convicted with Machine Gun Kelly in the Urschel kidnapping, continued to exchange correspondence with his victim in an almost friendly manner. Millionaire beer baron and rackets boss Scarface Al Capone, serving a 10-year sentence for income tax evasion, had been transferred from Atlanta because of his gangland connections. And Alvin Karpus, in the course of time, landed a job as the first convict clerk at Alcatraz. Sentenced to life imprisonment for conspiracy to kidnap wealthy St. Paul brewer William Ham, Jr., his central file also lists 15 bank robberies, 2 kidnappings, 4 murders, and 3 jailbreaks. Larry O'Brien's criticism of these and others is somewhat severe. Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman of Alcatraz, receives his share of attention.
I don't know what a psychiatrist would have said about Stroud, but believe me, I wanted nothing to do with him. I know of others that I considered incorrigible. Kelly, Bailey, Bates, Karpus, I felt would in time come around. Karpus, apparently at least, didn't have the hatred for everybody that wore a badge, though he did hate some of them about as much as anybody can be hated. However, I worked with Karpus quite a while, and we established a pretty good relationship.
Karpus had been one of the last of the most wanted criminals of his time to fall. Thus, when he arrived at Alcatraz, he found himself among many of his old acquaintances from the outside. An illustrious circle it was.
There was at least a dozen that I'd run around with at one time or another. You know, there was Machine Gun Kelly and Bates, Holden and Keating, Harvey Bailey. See, there was several more there that I had known at one time or another outside.
Smarter than the rest, he knew that survival came first in the order of importance, and survive he did, even though he was facing a sure 15 years on the rock before becoming eligible for parole. He was not to be allowed parole and would serve an additional 18 years before his release and deportation in 1969. 33 years in all. But Karpus, probably the most notorious of all the bad men of his period, is alive, well and prosperous. He lives in Montreal and recently has written a book. His view on Alcatraz and the American policy of correction are pungent, tough-minded, and unforgettable. Bank robber and kidnapper Alvin Karpus, sometimes known to another generation of Americana as Old Creepy, obtained his freedom in 1969. He now lives here in Montreal, Canada, after having lived and survived 26 years on the Rock, plus another 7 years at McNeil Island in the state of Washington. Born Francis Alvin Karpovitz, August 10, 1908 in Montreal, he moved with his parents to Topeka, Kansas before he was of school age. Later, he sold newspapers in the sleazier part of town, and by age 10, his associations had afforded him a liberal knowledge of the half-world of petty crime, pimps, and prostitutes. Already he'd been in several scrapes with the law, and in the next 15 years would rob many a bank, and according to the FBI statement, kill many a man. It is probable that the only thing that would save him from eventual execution would be his apprehension and conviction by the feds. Uncle Sam's courts dole out severe penalties, but rarely execute. Thus, Alvin Karpus, ironically, benefited from the severity of his well-earned penalties. He was a member of what J. Edgar Hoover labeled the toughest gang we ever cracked. Ma Barker, alleged to have been the head of that gang, finally, along with her younger son Freddie, was machine-gunned to death in their Florida hideout. Alvin Karpus was absent at the time, but his career also terminated shortly thereafter in New Orleans. According to official reports of the period, he was the only fugitive ever personally busted by Mr. Hoover. Karpus's version of his downfall is a little different.
Well, all I can say about this is that if that version of my arrest is any criteria, you know, as to the rest of the contents of this book, oh boy, they should put it right on a shelf for fairy tales, because because that's what that book is about. If it's no more accurate, the rest of it, than the way they described my capture in New Orleans.
This high-voltage criminal and leading gangland figure of the Prohibition era is now a respectable and respected citizen of Montreal. But when he was sent to Alcatraz in the fall of 1936, his stay there was to encompass almost the entire history of the Rock in its function as the most maximum of maximum security prisons. His views, in retrospect, are pungent. His reactions as strong and traumatic as on the wet, bleak, foggy morning he arrived on the Rock.
It's hard to explain that to you. Every guy, when he gets in prison, you don't think he's going to stay there long. Something will happen. But in my case, I wasn't kidding myself. The only thing I had going for me there, every year they'd talk about breaking the place up, you know, doing away with it. Well, that kind of kept things going. I didn't think I'd want to try to escape from there. It was just too tough. And I thought, well, if we get transferred and they break the place up, I have a little better shot at it. So over the years, you keep going like that. One thing will give you a little hope in this direction, another one will knock it out, and then something else will occur, and you say, well, maybe. But actually, it was not until 1955 that I even thought I had a ghost of a chance about anything, and only then, because the man that came back there is a warden, and he was a fairly decent sort of a guy for a job like that.
Could the Justice Department have picked a worse place?
I don't believe they could have, because as a matter of fact, they were going to establish it in southeast Alaska. On an island, the Attorney General went over and picked a site. Him and his wife were on an Army transport, and as they came back into the Golden Gate there, they seen this big sign across there, you know, U.S. Disciplinary Barracks. So he inquired around, and they wound up subleasing this thing for 5 years from the Army. But then the propaganda got so great for them, and this thing, you know, it was a big mysterious deal, you know, according to them, and it sort of took the imagination of the news media, the people, and everything, and the first thing you know, it was worth millions to them, and just in propaganda alone. And I might add at this point, it was probably the greatest fraud that was ever put off on the American people for that length of time. I think it lasted about 28 years or so, and they had the American people completely fooled. It was a real bad place, yes. But I would like to make it perfectly clear, I'm not sniveling about my treatment there or anything like that. It's just, it was so unnecessary. When you take a group of men, you deprive them of everything but the fact that they're having their meals and a place to sleep, no newspapers, no radio. Of course, there's people that will say, well, what the hell do they want? What did they get in trouble for if they don't like it? But the government had 20,000 other prisoners that they didn't treat in that manner. So, no, it wasn't necessary.